Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. In Zimbabwe, if there's one issue over which many people would say the war of liberation was fought over, it is land. The land issue has become one of the most controversial issues in Zimbabwe's political history. The whole problem of the land started in the late 1990s. And for the next 20 years, it was the center of all countries' political activity. The late Robert Gabriel Mugabe, in the video here, if he was to be asked before his death, what would you say is your legacy? I'm sure you would have said seizing the land and giving it to the people of Zimbabwe. This is him talking at the peak of that seizing of the land.
Now our enemies, because you really have behaved as enemies of Zimbabwe, that we are full of anger, and our entire community is angry, and this is why you have the war veterans now, seizing land.
You are our soldiers. You have a battle to fight. Go into that battle well-armed.
I got beaten up by the so-called nuclear guys. They were nothing but a set of hooligans and thugs.
Go into that battle with the full knowledge that there is a political enemy.
You are
The story of the land therefore started with the argument that land was being seized from the whites to redistribute it to the landless peasants. There can be no argument that there is a problem of shortage of land, particularly if you have traveled around Zimbabwe, where some of the peasants live on so arid land that it really is hard to see how they can be eking a living from that land. They are so crowded, some of the rural areas are becoming desert. There's hardly any grass there for the cattle to graze on, even during the rainy season. And the situation becomes worse during the dry season. So the need to redistribute the land was always there. So it was started when Robert Mugabe started it and his party They argued that the land was being seized to give to the landless peasants. But what unfolded, as we saw in that video, land was, the war veterans mostly would invade a white-owned farm and forcibly remove the white farmer. But soon after, more often than not, it will be the ruling elite who will take over that farm. The war veterans will be unceremoniously removed from the farm. And so when it became clear that the promise that the land would be given to the landless peasants was not being followed, the regime revised their policy and said, oh no, it's going to be one man, one farm. In other words, it's no longer the landless peasants, but Zimbabweans, and in this particular case, party loyalists, would get one farm. But after a while, it became clear that the ruling elite were getting more than one farm each. I think up to now, most people had believed that Robert Mugabe, his wife, and his children, he had 13 farms, and some of them really big farms. But now it's emerging that we were not being told the truth at all. His daughter, Bona Mugabe, is now going through a divorce with her husband. And the list of their wealth is impressive. I think most people were taken aback. In the list of the couple's wealth is 21 farms of varying sizes, from 6,385 hectares to 100 and something hectares farms. Two of the smallest farms there stand number 152, the Lunar Road, is said to be 12.07 hectares and is valued at 8 million. And stand number 153 Lunar Road, which is 12.5 hectares, and is valued at $5.1 million US. On these farms, there will be, of course, fixed and movable assets. Although the total value of these 21 farms is not given, except for those two small ones, which are considered to be stands, they are not even counted as farms. The smallest one of the farms is a tenth of this Lunar Road stands. So if one was to say each of those farms is valued at, say, average US 50 million, this will give the total value of all the 21 farms to well over $1 billion. So what we thought, when we thought that the Mugabe family had 13 farms, turns out that the daughter alone had nearly twice that number, 21. In the divorce papers, the couple also have 17 cars, including a Rolls Royce valued at $700,000. The total value of the 17 cars, $1 million. The couple have got also 21 residential properties, including a mansion in Dubai valued at $8 million. And the total value of the 21 residential stands is $20.3 million. We've got 2 stands in Chishawasha and they've got the various business empires and so forth. I think what is important here is to accept the reality that the ruling elite in Zimbabwe have grown incredibly rich, filthy rich. And the tragedy is all these millions of dollars, billions of dollars have been locked up instead of being circulated for the good of the country. The total value of Bona and her husband's properties there, we are looking at if we haven't counted the businesses that they own, but you'll easily get into $2.5 billion. That is enough money to have built a project like the Patoka Gorge. I've worked in the power industry. I know Patoka Gorge when it was first proposed in the early 80s. To build it, design, install, commission, everything would have costed between $2 to $3 billion. So the families, the couple's wealth alone would have built Patoka Gorge. Now, to some of you who are not familiar, Patoka Gorge would be the equivalent of Kariba Dam. Renewable, so it doesn't cause any pollution. And as long as there is rain, you're okay. And in this case here, for Zimbabwe, it means we'll be generating at Patoka Gorge, let the water into the river, and it will fill Kariba Dam, and use the same water again to generate, and then let it go. It will flow into Kaborabasa. So we'll have had power from 2 Kariba dams. Think of the contribution that would have made to the nation's GDP over all these years. Unbelievable. And yet it has been locked up in these stands, 17 cars, 21 farms, and so forth. Most of them, I'm sure you'll find they're not being used productively. And most of them, some of these farms, for instance, you find they are only producing because they are heavily subsidized. The minute the heavy subsidies are removed, more often than not, the business will go bust. What a criminal waste of resources. Nearly half of Zimbabwe's population, 49% of Zimbabweans, are now living in abject poverty. Most of the industries have closed. Schools are so poorly equipped. Hospitals, the same thing. Most of the infrastructure is in varying stage of decay and rot because of the 43 years of gross mismanagement by ZANU-PF. And no wonder Robert Mugabe and his fellow ZANU-PF thugs were prepared to kill to stay in power. They've rigged elections. They've even shown they were prepared to kill. And they have killed to stay in power. But this story would be amiss if we didn't mention that the country did have the opportunity to end the gross mismanagement. But alas, we do. And it is a serious problem. We did have the opportunity to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship, and we wasted it. That is what is so tragic about Zimbabwe. The GNU of 2008 to 2013, the primary purpose of that GNU was to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. But alas, we failed to do so. Because Morgan Tsvangirai and his MDC friends were welcomed onto the gravy train, and they forgot that the primary purpose, the people had risked life and limb to elect them into power, was to implement the reforms and bring about change. As the party's name implied, the Movement for Democratic Change. After 23 years in power, MDC have not implemented even one token democratic change. That is the truth. And at the present moment, by participating in these flawed elections, MDC are giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. And it's all very well to complain about how the ruling ZANU-PF elite are looting. We are giving them the opportunity to stay in power and continue the looting. That is where the problem is. If the reforms had been implemented properly during the GNU, ZANU-PF would have been removed out of office by 2013 at the very latest. Bona Mugabe was married in 2014. So at least as at that point, any of the properties that she was to acquire, it would have been her own father who was giving it to her, not him looting it from the nation, because he would not have been president by then if there had been free, fair, and credible elections in 2013. The looting we are talking about is continuing to this day. A few weeks ago, we watched the 4-part documentary by Al Jazeera. And in this particular case, the new president, Emerson Mnangagwa, was the one presiding over the operations, the looting that was taking place there. I think you don't have to be a genius to know that him and his family are amassing a lot of wealth from this rampant looting, not only in gold, but in diamonds, lithium, platinum, and many other areas. Bona Mugabe has a mansion in Dubai. Grace, she spends most of her time in Dubai. And I am telling you, it's not the same mansion, it's a different mansion. So Bona has got her own mansion, and Grace Mugabe has got her own mansion. And rumor has it that Emerson Mnangagwa has got his own mansion in Dubai too. So the looting has continued because we failed to implement the reforms. And as long as ZANU-PF retains the carte blanche powers to rig elections, the looting will continue. This idea that we can win rigged elections is a nonsensical idea. It's only an excuse to participate in a flawed election, and then at the end of the day, as usual, they will complain that elections were rigged, but then it's too late. We really need to get this issue right. There will be no free, fair, and credible elections in Zimbabwe until we implement the reforms. We need to cure ourselves of this case of rigged elections. Until we cure ourselves of that, the looting will continue. We'll continue to be amazed at some of the wealth that some of our ruling elite have amassed when they go through their divorces and the truth is revealed of how much they've amassed. We will all be saying, I can't believe this. Is this possible? Yes, it is possible. 2023 is an opportunity to change, to end the rampant looting. I do agree, and I repeat, I do agree that it is too late to implement any meaningful democratic reforms now. But what we can do is make sure that we expose this election process as a flawed, which it is. And we also expose that the opposition are participating in these elections out of greed. In other words, they have no political credibility at all. Combine those two, there is no way ZANU-PF should be given political legitimacy from a flawed process, from the participation of discredited opposition. We know that SADC leaders, particularly our friends across the Limpopo in the ANC, have already said they would like to, they would not accept regime change in Zimbabwe. In other words, they will support the ZANU-PF regime. But let's not make their jobs easy. let's make it very clear that we, the ordinary people of Zimbabwe, are the ones who want regime change, who know that this present system has failed us. We want meaningful change. And if we do not make our voice heard, then it's our fault. Another 5 years of this looting is unthinkable. And yet, if we do not do anything about it now, it is the reality. Thank you and good night.